Hello and welcome to the Creators Guild podcast. I'm Chris Howell and with me,
Jared Lovelady.
and we are here to talk about all things creative. A little bit later today in our creative pursuit, we're going to have another visit from one of your favorite guests, Liz Verity, and we're going to have another Learning with Liz. So excited to see what we're going to talk about today, what topic she has to discuss with us. But as always, to begin, we are going to read another chapter from A Flight from Shadows. If you haven't gotten your copy, this is your episodic reminder to go get it. And if you have, and you've read it on Amazon, this is your reminder to go review it. Okay. Last time we left off in the arena, and a new guest had just entered. So let's dive right in, shall we? Chapter 27, A New Breed of Warrior. Cycle of Ryo, year 12182. I see gods manifest in him. It has taken so long for us to learn that he represents what the goddess intended for us all along. Journal of Vershon Narvosh, 3rd day of Sopar, the 2nd 1,000 years. Narvosh turned to the two figures by the east gate. One of them slipped out and returned a moment later, followed by 3 men who entered behind him at a jog. These were not Alkari, nor were they overseers or trainers. They were of a height with one another, and each was garbed in the same decorative armor. They wore leather boots that rose just above their ankles. Gleaming greaves covered their shins, held in place by thick leather straps that crisscrossed their calves. Layered metal-studded leather strips hung from thick leather waistbands. Palm-sized metal discs emblazoned with scrollwork were sewn into the waistbands. Each wore leather bracers, studded with small metal spikes on the outside of their forearms. All 3 were painted with a collage of tattoos covering their arms, chest, and neck, intricate images, and runes wrapping up onto the shaved sides of their heads. The hair on top of their heads was long, flowing back into single braids. 2 of the men were brawny, with thick arms and barrel chests. One had skin as pale as milk. A braided, snow-colored goatee matched his hair. Both goatee and braid were adorned with small silver bells that jingled with each footfall. The other was his opposite, his skin like polished ebony, and his square jaw clean-shaven. Golden ribbons were woven into his scarlet braid. Both men carried short spears with colored tassels tied just below the spearheads in one hand and studded leather bucklers in the other. The third man was lean and whip-like, with dark olive skin. He too was clean-shaven. His face was all sharp angles with high cheekbones. His chestnut braid was adorned with 5 silver rings, and 5 silver rings made a collar around his throat. He carried a 2-handed saber with an ornate silver serpent forming the crossguard. Each man wore a pauldron on his right shoulder, held in place by leather straps, crisscrossing his chest, the symbol of gladiatorial executioner. On each pauldron was emblazoned the sigil of House Khosravi, one of the wealthiest buyers seated in the stands. Tawara watched in confusion. Aiden had explained how the gladiatorial system worked, going into great detail about the guild's shared hatred for the executioners. The ranks of gladiators consisted of both human and Alkari warriors. They were skilled fighters and expensive to keep and train. There was a tougher, darker side to the arena, however, with some gladiators trained as professional killers. As Tawara watched the men cross the arena floor, Narvosh turned to Bertrand, disdain clear in his voice. Are we quite sure this is necessary? As we agreed, Bertrand replied somberly. The standard display would not be enough. They must be overwhelmed. I agree they must be overwhelmed, said Narvosh, but I despise executioners, and these are Cyrus's bests. He shook his head at his large companion. To put Alandar at such risk, this is quite a gamble. What risk is there to Alandar? Asked Bertrand nonchalantly. These are mere flies. Alandar will swat them to the dirt. I wish I shared your confidence, my friend, Narvosh replied, or, at the very least, your calmness. I know this must be done, but there is always the chance. His voice trailed off as he watched the newcomers approach. Realization came to Tawara at Narvosh's words. This was no mere show they were about to witness. Her fists clenched, mimicking her anxious stomach. As the men approached, Alandar dropped his short spear and returned to the center of the arena. His breathing had slowed, and he stood calmly. The severity of the spear fight manifested itself on his body, as several welts could be seen welling up on his arms, chest, and back. Narvosh stepped down from the dais, followed by a white-robed man carrying a long gold-embroidered burgundy pillow. Cradled on the pillow were two identical overlong spathas with ornately worked leather hilts, the rippling lines of Damascus blades drawing in the afternoon light. He spoke to the buyers, projecting an air of confidence as he crossed the arena floor toward his prodigy. Alandar began his trial. Alandar began his trial by facing three combatants. As you know, the trials typically begin with a demonstration of skill by the warrior wielding the weapons with which he is most proficient. We have not yet seen this demonstration from Alandar. He waved his hand, indicating the three men. With the help of these warriors, he said, disdain slipping into his words, you will witness that demonstration now. The implication was clear. These men were not here to simply test Alandar. If he failed this trial, it would be through death. Narvash and the attendant reached Alandar a moment before the newcomers. The three fighters spread out to circle the group and slowly began to pace as each brandished their weapons. The trio were already putting on a show for the small audience. "Aye," said the lean fighter in a rough brogue, as he addressed his companions. His voice was loud enough to carry through the arena. "This one's a big one, isn't he? I ain't sure yet, but I think I might be scared." "I like the big ones," countered the ebony warrior in a rumbling bass, his words clipped and precise. "They are more fun to play with and take longer to die. I can savor the experience." Narvas stepped close to Alandar, reaching out with both hands to grasp the large Alkari just above the elbows. Their difference in height made Narvas look like a child, and he had to crane his neck to look into Alandar's eyes. "Listen to their words, my pretty," Narvas said, just loudly enough so as to be heard by those on the dais and the men circling the pair. "See how they mock and taunt you." He scowled at the men, letting them clearly see his displeasure, before turning a tender gaze back to Alandar. "My pretty," laughed the lean gladiator. "Oi, did you hear that?" He pointed at Alandar, mock astonishment on his face. "Oh, and ain't you a pretty one, too?" The pale fighter spoke up, addressing Narvash in a sardonic tone, his grin rueful. "It's too bad for you, skin seller. You should have put his pretty face in a pleasure house. When we get done with him, there won't be anything left to sell." Narvash's face remained calm, and his voice became petulant. "Alandar, you hear how they taunt even me," he intoned. His words were to Alandar, but it was clear he wanted the three men to hear him plainly. "These men are here to kill you, my pet. Though it will cost me much coin, I would like you to dissuade them of that notion quickly. Educate them in the meaning of the phrase, the wrath of the gods." With that, Narvash stepped back, allowing Alandar to pluck the swords away from the waiting attendant. The smile on Narvash's face was grim as he strolled back to the dais, the attendant in tow. "Good luck, gentlemen," he called over his shoulder as he left the circle to return to his seat. As Narvash sat, a pang of trepidation caused Tawara's stomach to clench once more. Were they that confident in Alandar's skill? Outwardly, Narvash's demeanor was calm and confident. Tawara suspected that he was fighting to put on a good show. Narvash glanced at the attendant with a bell, letting out a slow breath before giving a brief nod. The tinkling of the bell echoed through the silent arena, and the fighters moved in, making a show of spinning their weapons in dramatic fashion as they tested their prey. "Come on, big fella," the saber wielder taunted, as Alandar moved lithely with him, deftly deflecting the saber with one sword while sidestepping and parrying a tentative thrust from a spear. The ebony fighter laughed throatily as he whipped his spear shaft at Alandar's head. "That's it. Keep moving, Alkari," he taunted as Alandar smoothly turned the shaft with the flat of a blade, his other blade rotating to block a similar attempt from behind. "It won't be as fun to cut you apart if you are unconscious." "No," came the smooth voice of the pale fighter, "but we will do it just the same. It is, after all, what we are paid to do." He grinned fiercely as he whipped the tip of his spear at Alandar. He almost reached Alandar's thigh, but his blow, like all the others, was turned away. Tawara realized the men were playing with Alandar. This was a sick sort of game to them. The real fight had not yet begun. She felt her breath coming in short gasps. She could hear her own heart beating. It was so loud, she was sure Athandra would be able to hear it as well. She glanced at the other woman, who seemed just as anxious. Tawara's face flushed as her gaze locked on the dangerous dance before them. The ebony warrior and his saber-wielding companion stepped in to make a joint attack, The saber arced in a high slicing motion, while the spear went low in an attempt to reach Alandar's legs. The Akari's blades became two whirlwinds. He danced between the two strikes, turning both aside, before each spasa made quick, precise motions. As Alandar passed between the two men, both pauldrons fell from their shoulders to the dirt. For the first time, Alandar turned and pressed the attack, his swords giving neither man an opening to counter. Tuara watched in awe, as once again he passed between the two men, barely defending themselves from the onslaught. He suddenly withdrew and placed himself back in the center of the triangle. Blood dripped to the dirt from both men as Tuara stared in wonder. Small nicks covered the men's arms and torso, as though they had been pushed through brambles. As the two recovered, Alandar sprang toward the pale fighter. Once again his swords flashed, and the man's pauldron joined that of his companions, and he was introduced numerous times to the razor tips of Alandar's weapons. The Alkari drew back again, with a quick flurry of motion, to place himself in the now larger triangle formed by the clearly stunned opponents. Wariness emanated from the now silent combatants as they prowled around their not-so-timid prey. Alandar was unperturbed as he slowly turned, watching his hunters. The three men continued their prowling circle, reevaluating the warrior in their midst. The lean, saber-wielding fighter had circled to move directly in front of Alandar, and he started to crouch. As he brought his hands together to grip the hilt of his sword, Alandar sprang forward. The large Alkari's face displayed no emotion, only concentration, as he became the physical manifestation of death. He moved so quickly and struck with the fighter's sword with such force that his opponent was unable to mount any defense. The executioner's saber was knocked to the side by one spatha. An instant later the saber flew from his grip as the other spatha struck the back of his hand with the flat of his blade. In quick succession he was struck with the flats of heavy blades on his forearm and shoulder. The second blow drove him to his knees. A swift sideways swing brought the gleaming edge of the spatha around to meet the man's neck. It all happened so quickly that his saber was still skidding in the dirt when his head rolled past it on the arena floor. Tuara flinched, barely registering the reality of what had just happened. She heard a squeak from Athandra, sitting beside her, and the other woman's hand shot out to grip Tuara by the arm. She could feel Athandra's hand shaking as she watched the deadly dance continue in the now red-spattered dirt. Preparing for an attack from behind, Alandar spun, but the two spear-wielding men hadn't moved from their positions. The shock on the executioners' faces was like banners on a wall. Whatever fights these men had won previously, any expectation they had of this encounter simply going the same way had been jarred out of their minds. The two looked at their companion for a brief moment, his blood still pooling in the dirt, and both their expressions hardened. This was now a real fight. They moved toward the Okari, and the distance between them increased as they positioned themselves on either side of the warrior. Without a word, they began to circle, their pace steady. They flowed over the ground, stepping in time with one another, each step inching them closer to Alandar at the center of their rotation. Alandar rotated with the men, both swords at the ready, as the dangerous dance commenced. Inch by inch, the spearheads drew tighter and tighter into the circle. As one, the two men sprang forward, their spears thrusting. Tuara's breath caught, panic seizing her chest. Flowing like water, Alandar pivoted, his body twisted to avoid the deadly jaws closing from both sides. His body contorted as his sword struck both spears in an attempt to deflect them away. The pale man's spear turned wide, but the sharp edge of the dark fighter's spear slid across the skin of Alandar's right side, just below his ribs. A bright red line appeared, and blood began to flow. The dark fighter saw his strike land and began to move, ready to take advantage of the Alkari's reaction to the wound. But Alandar disappointed him. Instead, he continued his rotation and spun away from the dark man as he brought the fight in close to the pale-skinned fighter. With his spear extended, Alandar was able to step into the pale fighter's guard. He countered and swung his buckler at Alandar's face. The pommel of one of Alandar's sword came down hard on the man's forearm just above his bracer. The force of the blow shattered bone. Alandar continued on the same path, his body still rotating. The man cried out as he tried to turn in an effort to open the distance between them. His head turned just in time for his face to meet the back-handed blow from the sword pommel in Alandar's other hand. The big man's head whipped back, his teeth and blood flew from his mouth. He dropped, unmoving, to the dirt. The momentum carried Alandar around again, and he dove past the downed man as a spearhead from the ebony fighter pierced the air where the Alkari's ribs had been. He sprang from the roll to face the final opponent, both swords at the ready. dust-covered, his silver braid, and the welts from his trial with the spear stood out, dark and angry against his skin. A heavy stream of red leaked from his side that nearly matched the red marks staining his forearm and thigh. Despite the abuse he had taken, Alandar was unperturbed. His blood-stained blades began to dance as he moved toward the last executioner, his face and eyes devoid of emotion. As the Alkari advanced, the lone fighter took a wary step back, his spear making short flicking motions, like a snake's tongue testing the air. With a quick step, Alandar rushed the fighter, who tried to dodge, but Alandar was too fast. A powerful overhand swing brought the flat of the heavy sword into contact with the fighter's spear hand. At the wrist, the spear fell from the fighter's grip, the sound of bones crunching from under the leather bracer. The follow-through swing with Alandar's other sword was deflected by the buckler, and the fighter dove, driving his shoulder into Alandar's bleeding side. The large Alkari moved with the momentum of the lunge. As they rolled, Alandar's legs thrust up into the man's thighs. The force threw the fighter over Alandar's head, tumbling him into the dirt. Continuing the momentum, Alandar rolled smoothly onto his feet, springing to face the tumbling man, his two swords coming immediately to the ready once more. The fighter recovered quickly, coming up in a low crouch near his headless companion. His right hand was pressed against his side, obviously causing him pain. His buckler lay in the dirt. His left hand reached out to lift the dead man's saber from the arena floor. Alandar stepped forward. The big man lunged, moving with practiced precision to slash across Alandar's middle. The blade slashed only air, as Alandar deftly avoided the cut that would have spilled his insides onto the ground. The fighter brought the saber around again and drove forward with a series of masterful forms. Each attempt was deftly avoided, as Alandar slid smoothly around each swing of the blade, not bothering to use his swords to deflect the attacks. The fighter paused momentarily, concentration painting his face as the two men's eyes locked. He raised his blade in front of him in a quick salute, the corners of his mouth twitching, concentration changing to resignation. He rushed forward again and tried desperately to reach the Alkari with his blade. Alandar became silk flowing on a gentle breeze. Tuara had never seen such smooth perfection manifested in such deadly form. Time slowed as she watched him. It seemed to her that his movements required no effort as he deflected an overhead attack with his left hand, dropping to one knee in front of his opponent. His right hand brought the sword it carried across the other man's middle in a powerful backswing that sliced through ebony skin like so much parchment. Alandar spun with the swing and rotated full circle to stand beside the other man, his blades back at the ready. The blow came with such power that it nearly cut the other man in half. His torso pitched forward as the connection to the lower half of his body was severed. He fell and gasped a few short breaths before going still on the dirt floor. Tuara forced her eyes from a grisly scene and turned to face Thandra. The other woman's face was pale. Perspiration beaded on her forehead, and her throat clenched as she repeatedly swallowed. Tuara reached out a hand to her, and she flinched at the touch. The contact seemed to break the spell. Thandra seized a goblet of wine and drained it in a single throw. Tuara wished her own wine goblet was not empty. She felt a bit green herself. She squeezed Thandra's hand and watched as Narvash rose from his seat. Relief painted his face. He strode across the arena with his horse-faced attendant in tow. They stood over the mangled corpse of the ebony fighter as his blood spread. He turned his attention to Alandar. "You have done well, my pet. Come, stand here with me." Alandar did as instructed, lowering his blades as he stepped forward to stand in front of Narvash. White-robed figures moved to the floor, but there was no hesitation, no hastiness in their movements. There was no doubt about the status of the three fighters. Narvash tisked as he looked Alandar over. "You look dreadful, my pretty," he grimaced. He bent slightly to inspect the slash at Alandar's side. "This does not look deep, but you have managed to fill it with dirt from all your rolling around," he said, annoyance in his voice. He straightened and reached a hand to pat Alandar's chest, his words now gentle. "You did exceptionally well. I am most pleased with your performance today. Be happy with yourself." The big Alkari smiled down at the smaller man, the same adoration filling his eyes that the other Alkari warriors had shown. And that is the end of chapter 27, where we are introduced to a new breed of warrior.
Yes.
By the name of Alandar. So this entire series, everything we're writing, was originally centered around Alandar. Like the whole thing, everything we came up with.
Yeah, he was the main character.
His story was the story. So now you have met Alandar. We couldn't, well, we probably could have. We could have come up with something. But as we got deeper and deeper into the story, Alandar's an Alkari. And the Alkari, by everything we've come up with, the Alkari are soulless. They have no will of their own. They have no anything of their own. How do you write a story from the perspective of a chair who doesn't experience any emotion or any will of their own?
Yeah. And the other characters just kept growing, and it was like they're becoming more and more character, people.
Yeah.
And he's not he's not showing any growth. What are we gonna do?
Yeah. And then we started shifting, and then we were like, you know what? This story's about Tawara. So Tawara became the main character. And we are where we are now.
Yep.
So you met Alandar. Tawara hasn't met Alandar, but we've been introduced to Alandar. So hopefully you enjoy seeing where this goes. There's still a lot of story left ahead to tell all the tales of these different characters. But for now, we are going to jump to another experience of learning with Liz. Okay. Alrighty, so joining us again today for Learning with Liz is once again Liz Verity.
Hello, hello.
Hello, welcome back.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
How have things been recently?
They've been all right.
Yeah.
I'm
Nothing super exciting or new in the works at the moment?
I mean, I think it's all exciting. So, but like whenever people ask me, I'm always like, well, I'm writing and editing. So it's kind of the same.
Yeah. And it's really like when I get people ask, oh, how's the book going? And I'm like, well, do you want me to answer that honestly?
Yeah, like, do you want me to tell you about all the plot problems I'm having and how I'm trying to like push this piece and this piece together and it's not fitting? Or do you just want me to tell you, yeah, I'm still writing?
Yeah, exactly. You're like, I'm still doing it.
It's like, I haven't given up yet.
Yeah.
I get asked to work, you guys, because, we published the book,
Yeah.
He's like, how's the writing going? I'm like, well.
Words are going on stage.
Still writing.
Yeah.
Yep.
Well, my fingers sit on the keyboard and I go click, 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 click. Most of the time. Yes. Sometimes my fingers just sit there on the keyboard and I stare. And that's about it.
Yeah. Yeah. It's either way though, you're still doing something. I mean, I tell my family all the time, like, or friends, like if I'm in the room and I'm staring at a wall and I look zoned out, leave me alone because I'm trying to fix something.
Yeah.
Like I'm not working. I'm still just trying to figure it out.
But it's not like, oh, how's the book going? Well, it started the swim team and we're prepping for soccer.
Yeah. It feels like you're good, but you definitely can't talk about it the same way.
Yeah. I mean, I could say, how's the book going? Well, Tawara got attacked and Athandra, just go into that stuff and people will be like, what are you talking about?
I don't understand.
Yeah. I was just trying to make casual conversation. And I'm like, that's the wrong casual conversation.
Yeah. Nothing's casual about talking about a book when you're writing it.
No.
Yeah. Like, it's the equivalent of, what are your thoughts on the Roman Empire? Well, let me tell you.
Well, let's dive in. Like,
yeah, exactly. Like, where do you even go with that? So, I don't know.
Yeah, it's like those memes you see online where it's like, if they're an introvert, ask them what they're reading right now, and then you can just sit back and relax because it's the only topic we will just keep going and going on.
Yeah.
Like, yes, the books. We will talk about books.
Yeah. I don't know. Yeah, I see it a lot as, when people are like, hey, how's it going? Like, You don't.
You don't want to know.
I get it. Thank you for asking. How's it going? But beyond just being like good.
Yeah, that's all they want. It's like the new hello. It's like, hey, how's it going? And you're
Yeah.
like, good. How are you? Good, good. And
Yeah.
you walk away like, it's a passing conversation.
Yeah. I mean, if somebody stopped me and they were like, "Hey, what's Tawara gonna do about this in your story?" Then I would be like, "All right, let's have a conversation."
I got
Like,
this.
do you really want to know? Are you okay with spoilers? Because we can dive into this.
Yeah.
Or if they're like, where did the Trekken come? Where did the Trekken come from? Do you have time to tell me about that?
I'm like, yeah, I can tell you about
I'd be
that
like, yeah, let's
all
talk.
day.
Let's talk. But just, how's the book going? What are you up to? How's progress?
Yeah. It's not easy to talk about because when you want to tell them about it, but if they don't get it, then you're just talking. You see their eyes glaze over, and it's
Yeah.
like, all right, I'm going to stop talking now because you
Yeah.
don't care that much. So yeah,
There's-
it's hard.
There's some writing groups or people that I'm connected to that do writing, and one of the guys on X will post daily. He's either posting like, here's my writing stretch. It's from an accountability perspective.
Yeah.
And he's like, wrote for 2 hours today, got 1,500 words written or whatever the case may be, and it's literally just that. Or worked on editing today. I'm now like, he has it figured out based on word count. It's like, I'm 27% of the way through the book. And I'm like, that's great. Awesome. Good job.
Yeah.
I'll be like, keep up the good work kind of thing. But I'm not like, what did you edit today? Can you, let's get into this long form discussion for the next 3 hours
Yeah.
about what you edited.
Exactly.
1, he doesn't have time to talk about it. 2, I don't have time to talk about it. And 3, if we had the time, we would both be spending it writing.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, you can only really go in depth talking with someone if they already know your book.
Yeah, pretty much.
Otherwise, it's just kind of like, I can tell you I'm writing and that's it.
Yeah. Yeah. It's the still going.
Yeah.
Still working on it.
So, moral of the story, if you know an author, don't ask them how the book's going. Ask them what they got excited about that day or, something like that. Because I know I have those moments where, like, I wrote a really good comeback in dialogue. I'm so excited about it. Or something like that. But otherwise, yeah, it's hard to talk about.
Yeah. But it isn't hard to talk about educational stuff.
No, it's not. That's really easy.
Which is why we have Liz with us today.
Yeah.
So Liz, learning with Liz, what do you have for us to learn today?
I want to talk about something that I've kind of been pretty passionate about lately. And that is story structure versus plot. A lot of people think it's the same thing. I'll hear people say like, oh, I'm plotting my book. I'm using Save the Cat or the hero's journey or whatever. And I'm like, that's not a plot. That's a story structure.
Yeah.
So I just kind of want to talk about that a little bit today and get people to understand the difference and how these tools can help them create a story when they're merged together.
Okay. So it can be kind of setting up for what's the difference between story structure and plot, or story structure and plot structure, or just plot in general.
Just plot. Yeah, plot in general. So story structure is, I think of it as cooking or a baking recipe. It tells you what should go in when, how much, that kind of thing. It's a way to know how to make a story.
Yeah.
Plot is what you put in it. So you can have a cookie recipe, but while the ingredients may be the same, there's going to be some things changed. Like, are you doing chocolate chip cookies? Are you doing, peanut butter cookies? Different things like that. So story structure is how you structure the events, and plot is what you put in as the events kind of thing.
Gotcha.
So describing it like that might be a little confusing. I know.
That's okay. We're going to dive into
Yeah,
this.
when
We're going to
somebody
dive
told
into
me
this and
that,
get a
it
little
was
deeper.
yeah, it's hard to talk about because everybody wants to think of it as the same thing. So story structure, there's tons of ones out there. I mean, there's Superstructure, 7 Point, Save the Cat, Hero's Journey, Hollywood formula. You can just keep going and going.
Yeah.
On my website, lizverity.com,
LizVerity.com. Go check it out.
there is a ton of posts on, like, I just did a summary of all these different story structures.
Yeah.
But they all kind of have the same general setup, and they all have what I call the 5 basic points. You have the beginning with the inciting incident, so it's kind of like sets the stage for how things are going, and then you have an event that just pushes your story into action. And then you have rising action, you have the climax, you have falling action, and then the resolution. They all name them different things, so it gets confusing. But that's generally how you structure a story. You're not going to start with the resolution or the climax. That's just, you're not going to have much of a story if you do that.
Yeah.
So that's your story structure. And what I tell everybody about that is you want to find the one that clicks with you, because they're all kind of the same.
Yeah.
So I know some people that they say Save the Cat is way too in depth. Like, it's just too many points, too many things to remember. They want the simple version.
Yeah.
So it's really just about finding the one that clicks in your head that you can follow. I see a lot of people get lost in the story structure because they'll read one and they'll like this one point, they'll read another and they'll like that point, and then they try to make their own story structure and, like, I'm gonna take this one from this one and this one from this one, or they try to use all of them at the same time, and it complicates the story. It gets them frustrated. So that's really my big advice with that is, like, pick one, stick with it. If you find it doesn't work for you, try another one. But when you find one, just stick with it. You don't have to constantly keep changing to somebody else's unless it clicks better.
What if you don't really know what your story structure is and you're just like, we should make our character do this?
Discovery writers like pantsers. Yeah, those are people. So there's two, the plotters and the pantsers, the ones that plan out the story, the ones that write it by the seat of their pants. Story structure has to be there regardless.
Yeah.
But it just depends on when you put it in there. So plotters are going to look at their story structure and they're going to plan out the events, versus pantsers are going to write the story. And then when they edit, they go back and you'll look at it and be like, okay, like, do I have my inciting incident? Where is it? Okay, it's on page 300. Cut out the first 300 pages and start there, kind of thing. Like, you can identify it. And if you can't identify it, that's probably a key that you're missing a piece, and that your story probably won't work out as well as you hope. And then you can just add it in. So whether you do it before or after, it's still going to be in there at some point.
Yeah. So one of the reasons I ask that is to hopefully help kind of highlight the difference between plot and story structure. Mm-hmm. Because and I'm just kind of throwing this out there, and you can tell me what I got right and what I got wrong from your perspective.
Okay.
So you can have an idea for some character is going to do something and face some challenge and accomplish a goal. And it's this great new thing that you're like, nobody's ever thought of this before. And I'm going to have this character do this amazing thing and write this whole tale of this story of this character doing this great thing. The plot is the character's arc or the character doing this thing. The structure is how did you accomplish telling the story of that character doing the thing?
Yeah, pretty much. Yes.
So regardless of whether you know that you're writing by a certain story structure, if you're telling a story, if you have a plot that you accomplish the goal of that plot, there's likely some story structure that you have followed, whether you know it or not.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, the basic 5 points I think everybody gets. They all know the story has to start, that things have to get worse, there has to be a climax, that things have to settle down, and there has to be an end.
Yeah.
It's kind of ingrained in us, we grew up with stories. Our whole lives are stories. So we understand that much. It's more of the story structures help you pin down what kind of emotions to have, where to dig into emotions, where to dig into the external events, and the thrilling action, and things like that, where to do it in the story.
Yeah.
It's just to help you put it out there in a way that is most impactful.
Yeah. Well, and it may be like there are, I'll compare it to like somebody who's a savant,
Mhm.
where they sit down in front of a piano and in a very short amount of time, suddenly they can play extremely well. They just somehow their brain just grasps the connection between moving their fingers and making specific chords and sounds and expressions come out by tickling these keys.
Yeah.
And there can be someone who is a storyteller that they naturally are able to just spin a tale.
Yes.
But even that storytelling savant will likely be following some sort of structure to express whatever the tale is they're spinning.
Yes, exactly.
So, what are, from a toolbox perspective, if you're not a savant, if you're not a
Yeah.
a literary genius,
Yep.
how can understanding the difference between story structure and plot help somebody? How do you put these tools of this is plot, this is story structure, I'm putting these in my toolbox, and I'm going to pull them out and use them to improve my writing or even begin writing?
Okay. So I'm going to put that question on hold for a minute
Okay.
and dig into plot real fast
Okay.
to explain, so I can explain the difference. So you were mentioning plot is, I'm going to do a thing I'm going to accomplish.
Yeah.
And that's really what it is. I have eight points of what a plot is.
Okay.
And part of that is the goal, the obstacles, the things that you have to come up against. So I have the plot pillars, which I kind of say hold up the story. That's why they're the pillars. So that's the goal, the stakes, the plan, and then the antagonistic force. So goal is what your character wants. Obviously, stakes is, what's at stake. What are they going to lose or gain by getting or losing their goal? The plan, because having a goal is not going to be any use if you don't have a plan to achieve it.
Yeah.
So they're going to have that. And then they're going to have the antagonist. I call it the antagonistic force. I actually borrowed that from September C. Fox. She's a writer that I follow. She's has a lot of really deep knowledge on it. So I kind of built this off of her because she's the first one that introduced me to plot is not story structure.
Yeah.
But anyways, antagonistic force is basically whatever is opposing your person's goal.
Because it could be internal, could be external.
Yeah,
it could be a bad guy.
It could be the weather. Like it doesn't have to be a person. Most of the time there is an antagonist, but there could also be other things in the story that blocks your character from their goal.
To quote to paraphrase the Three Amigos, it is your El Guapo. And the El Guapo could be that you're too short or that you have a stutter, or your El Guapo could be an actual El Guapo who is a bad guy who wants to kill you.
Yeah, exactly.
Just think of the nursery rhyme or song rhyme. I don't know. Itsy Bitsy Spider.
Yeah.
The rain is the antagonist.
Yes,
Yeah.
exactly. Yep.
And the water climbing the water spout is the goal.
Exactly. Yep. Okay, so those are the plot pillars. And then I have what you call the plot cycle, which is, it starts with the inciting incident, the conflict, and then it's going to cycle around. So you'll have the conflict, there'll be a decision, so however you're going to face whatever has come across for you, the consequences of that decision, and then there's going to be a shift. So when you make that decision, it's going to affect other things. There's going to be a shift in your goal, in your plan, in the obstacles, whatever there is. So that's going to cycle through. So those 8 points of plot are going to be in every scene of your book. That's the story. The story structure, it's segmented. You're going to have the inciting incident. The midpoint and the inciting incident are going to be the same thing. Those are separate things. It's not something you're going to go through continuously. So plot's going to happen in every single one of your points of the story structure, but story structure doesn't happen within a plot. So they're kind of like fit inside each other kind of thing. So that is the two together. I'm going to stretch your memory here. What was your question about the two of them?
So, knowing the difference between plot and story structure, if you're not a savant who just can naturally sit down and be like, I'm going to start writing and blah, 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 beginning to end, or you're a savant bard who can just stand up and start speaking and suddenly win everybody over with and have people engrossed in your tale
Yeah.
because you're just so good at telling a story. Instead, you're like, well, I need some tools to help me improve my storytelling or begin telling a story.
Mhm.
How do we well, this is story structure, this is plot, and then put those into a toolbox to be able to draw on that knowledge and
Okay.
use it effectively to begin writing or improve writing.
Okay. So the first thing you have to do is pick a story structure, whichever one you want to follow. We'll stick with the 5 basic points right now, just for the example. So you have your opening. Kind of like you get to know the character before the inciting incident happens and everything falls apart. So in that opening, you're going to establish your plot pillars. So the goal, the stakes, the plan, and the antagonist. Now, those aren't going to be your external ones. They're going to be your internal ones because the inciting incident hasn't happened yet. So you can't have the villain come in yet because they don't even know they exist.
Yeah.
This is going to be for your internal. So it's going to be what does your character want out of life? How do they plan to get there? What's the stakes if they don't? What's keeping them from achieving that right now? So it's going to start your internal story. And then at that 10% mark, they always say there's the inciting incident. Now you can move it around. You don't have to do necessarily 10%, but that's where the external event happens. That starts your external plot.
Yeah.
And then you're going to reestablish your plot pillars. You're not going to lose the other ones. The internal ones are still going to be there, but you're going to start the external ones. So, what's the new goal now that we have this conflict, and what's the stakes, what's the plan, and who's working against us? And then once you have those, throughout every scene, you're just going to use your plot cycle to go through. So you're going to run against conflict, you're going to make a decision, there's going to be consequences, and then there's going to be a shift. And that shift means that one of your pillars is going to shift. So their goal could change. Like, say the goal was to stop a bomb.
Yeah.
So it could be, all right, so in this scene, we need to find the bomb. Well, if you found the bomb, that's not your goal anymore. You got to do something else. If you didn't find the bomb, but you ran up to some bad guys who are trying to kill you, your goal shifts from finding the bomb to staying alive.
Yeah.
So it's going to shift that. If it doesn't shift your goal, it could shift your plan. So maybe your plan to find the bomb was to use the police to help search the building or whatever. Well, maybe the police are stuck in a traffic jam. They're not coming.
Yeah.
You got to pick a different plan. So you can just go through and at the end of every scene, something has to shift. That's what shows your plot progression. So if you don't advance, you're going to set back. But either way, your reader needs to know that you're either getting better or worse. You're getting closer to the goal or farther away from the goal. There needs to be that measurement so that they know something's happening. Because I don't know, have you ever read a book or watched a movie where you're like, nothing happened in that scene?
Probably.
Yeah.
I'd
I've
have to think of
yes, yeah.
Yeah.
I've had a few where it's not like nothing happens, like there was this really witty conversation between two people or whatever. Like there was something going on. It's not like nothing happens, but my thought process is always like, nothing happened. I'm like, why am I thinking that? And that got me thinking, okay, why isn't this? And it's because the goal of the story was to stop the bomb and we didn't do a thing towards it. So it kind of felt like a pause from the story, which means we didn't have any progress or setbacks.
Yeah. I'm trying to think of a specific example of either a movie, TV series, book, something like that, where it was like sharing a scene for a scene's sake.
Mm-hmm.
I think there's been I've never really watched soap operas.
Yeah, there's a lot of drama in those.
Yeah, you get the drama, but I feel like sometimes maybe a little bit of that happens, and it's like the scene is falsely leads you, where there's some comedians that mention it where just before commercial break, the door opens, someone steps in, and John, dun dun dun,
Yep.
break scene, and then comes back from the commercial, and the door opens again, and the person's like, "Hello, John." Like, that's not even the same thing. What the heck? Did
Yeah.
that previous scene even matter?
Yep. Yeah, and that's false tension. You know, they're trying to build it up to make you want to stay around.
Yeah.
You do see in movies, especially like sci-fi genre or anything that's got a lot of CGI, they will put in scenes that are just showing off
The world building.
the world.
That's a good, well, not even just world building. So I just thought of what you just said, made me think of a good example.
Okay.
In my opinion, and it happens a lot now that I think about it, and it's really annoying.
Okay.
And it doesn't matter, Superman, Guardians of the Galaxy. It doesn't happen as much in Guardians. I'll give Guardians that. But the whole MCU universe, everything. So, the Superman, I don't remember if it's Man of Steel, which one it is with, gosh dang it, what's his name? The newer.
I think Man of Steel is the newest one.
Well, who's the guy who's really
Henry.
into? Yeah, Henry Cavill.
I just remember Henry.
Gosh,
I'm not good with actors and
Henry,
actresses'
I think it's
names.
Cavill. My brain's glitching
That
at the
sounds
moment.
right.
What's that?
That sounds right.
Just call him Henry. We'll go. with it.
Henry. Hank. We'll call him Hank. So the one where Emperor Zod comes and they fight. Well, you spend like I don't know how long of the movie with just the two of them punching each other in the face. Like there's one scene where Superman is, I don't remember who's on top. One of them is on top holding onto the other one, and they fly like through buildings and then out into the country, then through houses in the country, and they're scraping across the ground, and they scrape through cornfields, and then I'm like, they're invincible people that can't hurt each other.
Yeah.
Why are we watching them punch each other in the face so much? It would be like, let's have a scene where it's going to be a 10-minute scene, and it's going to be a scene with Chris. And Chris is really angry at that pillow. And so Chris is just going to run down the street for 10 minutes punching the pillow. And that's it. That's the scene.
Yeah.
For 10 minutes. Now, we're going to have, as he runs down the street, there's going to be somehow, as he runs down the street, some cars are going to flip over. And there's going to be explosions in the background. And we're going to keep showing his face going, "Arr," as he punches the pillow over and over and over again. He can't hurt the pillow. The pillow cannot hurt him. There's nothing that can happen as a result of him punching the pillow.
Yeah.
He's not even in any danger of being hit by a car because he doesn't leave the sidewalk ever the whole time. In fact, there aren't even any cars driving. All the cars are parked. So that's the scene. Let's put that in our movie. And then everybody's like, yeah,
Yeah.
let's do that. And I'm like, oh my gosh.
Yeah. Another
Nothing.
example of a different one that gets me is like with CGI and all that stuff. In Star Trek, the motion picture, they bring out the new revamped Enterprise.
Yeah.
And there's a 5-minute scene, no dialogue at all, of them just showing it from different angles.
It's like the movie's
like-
version of an info dump.
Yeah, it's like, and there's no reason for it other than they want to show off this new Enterprise.
Yeah.
And it's 5 minutes.
Yeah.
Not a word is said.
Wow.
And it's like, and that's an extreme, but you find that in all kinds of movies.
Yeah.
Mhm.
But what's a literary example of that?
It'd be easier if I had a book to read from.
Yeah, I'd have to think from a book perspective. I'm trying to scroll back through my brain as much as I can to think of a book scene that is literally just
I mean,
scene for the sake of scene.
yeah, there's a lot of in fantasy and science fiction of the world building stuff, especially the epics, because
Yeah.
that's what readers are reading for. They're wanting the alternate world. So you think of Brandon Sanderson, like there's a couple
Yeah.
pages in his book I've skipped, but I'm just like, you're just telling me about the plant life and how it leans one way. I don't care. I mean, like, I do, but like it's a lot. So I know but it's also kind of expected in that genre, so it's not too much of a taboo. But doing that in something else, like a thriller, you spend 2 pages describing a room that, I don't know, the dude sleeps in. It
Yeah.
doesn't push anything forward for the plot.
Yeah. That's something I'm going to jump out just a little bit about with Jared's in my book. Like, we get really descriptive in some of our stuff.
Mm-hmm.
But one of the things we've talked about, and we've talked about it explicitly, is that everything we put into our book, we've thought about, like, at some point it will be important
Yes.
to something, even if it might be 6 books later, where we already know this person walked into this room and what happened in this room. I mean, I guess there is a little bit. We try not to go too deep into, like, we want to set this picture of this is an extravagant room.
Yeah.
So we try to describe the extravagance without going, more than a few sentences in describing it. But a lot of the stuff that we've put in are like this character or how they moved or something that they said. We already know, like, we put this in, and this is going to be something that, if you're paying attention, in 5 books, we already know where that detail is going to be important later.
Mm-hmm.
And hopefully our readers will be like, oh my gosh, that was this. It wasn't just description. It was actually important and is going to be important at this future point in time.
Yeah, there was actually a paragraph in the chapter we were editing last night.
Yeah.
That was like, yes, if they paid attention to this, actually just in the next book,
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
it'll be important.
Yeah.
It's not integral if they don't catch it, but if they do,
It's like a little Easter egg.
Yeah.
Yeah. And those are fun. Sometimes they can be hard to catch, especially if it's like 5 books in between laying the hint and fulfilling it. But there's a lot of readers who are obsessive to the point where they're like, I love all these little things, and they want to see how they all connect and everything.
Yeah. But it's very much like those scenes. Just totally scene for the sake of scene, without no character development, no plot progression, no anything. So when you were describing Star Trek and displaying the ship, I immediately thought of Galaxy Quest, which, Liz, Galaxy Quest?
I still haven't watched it, but
No,
I will
Galaxy
get
Quest
to it.
yet.
I will get to it.
So there's a scene in Galaxy Quest where they show the ship, and they do this long, drawn out, the ship is leaving the space station for the first time.
Yeah, that's actually a direct spoof of...
Yeah. But it's going really slow, and then all of a sudden it shows like the outer doors where the ship is going to traverse through the outer doors. Except as it's going through the outer doors, all of a sudden in the screen, the outer doors start shifting to the right. And then it shows all the characters, and they're all going like, tilting their head, kind of cringing a little bit. And then you hear as the ship scrapes down, the hull of the ship scrapes down the inside of the station, and all the people are cringing, and the driver guy, it's like the first time he's ever actually flown this ship.
Oh, no.
But it's a total spoof on scenes like that. And it's like, they didn't just, we're going to spend 5 minutes showing you the ship. It's, we're going to spend 5 minutes showing you the ship and what happens when someone who's never flown it before tries to fly it.
Yeah, as we wreck it.
Yeah.
Which makes it way more interesting.
Yes. So, story structure, plot.
Mm-hmm.
So within that structure, or within plot development, you need to have that element of movement.
Yes.
And within your story structure, you need to structure your story in a way that it facilitates plot movement and those shifts, that plot cycle
Hmm.
of problem resolution or problem decision shift.
Yeah. Yeah. So it will, you'll have it within everyone. So say we have um, the climax.
Yeah.
You're going to have your conflict, and then they're going to make. They're not going to quite make their decision yet. So when you get to the end of the book, it's like one plot cycle just stretched out.
Yeah.
So you'll have the conflict, and then before that conflict leads to a decision is when you're going to have what some people call the all is lost moment, the dig down deep, the dark night of the soul. I mean, there's lots of things,
Yeah.
but it's basically where they hit rock bottom. And then they have to embrace the lesson that they've learned in order to succeed. So you're going to have your conflict, you're going to have that moment where it's kind of like this internal moment of, okay, I'm going to push through. And then you'll have the decision to push through, and this is what I'm going to do. And that will be your climax. So the whole climax is just a decision scene. It's like conflict and the decision on how to fix it.
Yeah.
And then after that, the resolution of your book is the second half of that plot cycle. So it's the consequences and the shift. So you'll see the consequences of how they saved the day or how they got the girl or, you know.
But it's like the ultimate shift.
Yes, yeah.
Rather than all these minute
everything's
shifts that push them
fixed.
in a direction. It is now the major shift happens.
Exactly. And then you'll also show the internal shift. So in your resolution, you'll have that, these are the consequences, and then the shift in the character themselves. They've embraced this lesson. They've become a better person. And this is how their life is now because of that. So at the beginning of the book, you're going to kind of run through those cycles quite a bit. But when you hit that climax to the end of the book, it's really just one big plot cycle that you're just kind of slowing it down and you're really digging into it.
Okay. So going back to how can someone say if they have an idea for a story, but it's generic, if they're like, oh, I want to tell a story about a kid who finds a rock in a stream and it turns out to be a rock that every wish he makes comes true.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I think I could make a really good story out of that. But that's all they have for an idea.
Okay. Well, if they are, well, I guess it doesn't really matter if they're a pantser or a plotter. If they're a pantser, they can just sit at the keyboard and figure it out as they go. If they're a plotter, they can sit down at the keyboard and write an outline to figure out how to go. But either way, so what you described is like the inciting incident. You know, they find this rock and it grants wishes. So that's how their life is turned upside down. So you rewind a little bit and like, okay, what does this person's life looks like? Why are they in the stream? Are they having a good day, a bad day? Do they have a good life or bad life? You know, what kind of wishes would they want? Are they going to ask for, like their life to be better, or are they going to ask for somebody else's life to be worse? So you kind of want to explore your character development stuff to create that opening scene. And then, of course, you have your inciting incident. And then from there on out, like I said, it's just the cycle of like, okay, we have this rock that grants wishes. The first wish comes, it's going to go wrong, or something is going to go wrong because of it. And then, okay, what decision do they make in response to that conflict coming up? And then what is that decision, the consequences of that decision, and then how does the consequences affect their life and shift what they wanted at the beginning? They wanted their life to be better, or they wanted this person's life to be worse. How does that shift it? Did it make their life better or that person's life worse? And if not, okay, now we got to deal with it. So it's super easy, especially if you're a pantser and you just want to write as you go and let the ideas come. You can just ask yourself that next step every time of like, okay, my character's life is perfect. all right, I'm going to throw something at it. What are you going to throw at it to make their life worse? And then, okay, how are they going to respond to it? So it makes it nice because then you can just kind of like, okay, and just keep going until you build up to that climax.
Yeah. So one of the key elements there that um, I took in one of my classes in college, we were talking about writing, and my professor was like, okay, I'm gonna give you an example here. Like one example is, so there's a little Bambi deer that runs out in the field, runs out in a prairie, and there's a butterfly, and it sees the butterfly, and it follows the butterfly, and it prances across the field, and then the butterfly goes off the screen, and then Bambi follows it off the screen, and then the credits come up, and that's the story. Like, so that's version 1.
Mm-hmm.
Version 2 is the little Bambi runs out in the meadow, and it sees a butterfly, and it's prancing around, and it's chasing the butterfly, and it runs out in the middle of the field, and then all of a sudden a dinosaur foot crashes down and smashes the little Bambi into the field, into the mud.
Uh-huh.
Like, which story is more interesting?
Yeah, I mean, like,
And the
something's got to go wrong.
Yeah, the point of that is, if everything is just perfect and la-di-da, if all you do is get wishes and they always come true and everything's all happy, well, great. That's an that's an interesting concept. That's not an interesting story.
Yes.
I mean, all of us would love to have a rock that we can grant wishes on and they come true.
Yeah, it's
Yes.
great for real life,
Yeah.
but it's not an interesting story.
No.
It's not going to compel someone to read about it.
Yeah, it's Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory, or Charlie and the Chocolate Factory,
Yes.
with Gene Wilder, the preferred version, in my opinion.
The original.
Yes. Gene Wilder, Willy Wonka says, Charlie, do you know what happened to the boy who finally got everything he'd ever wished for? He lived happily ever after. And I'm like, that's a great ending. That's a terrible story.
Yeah, exactly. It's like, okay, and we're done.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's like that saying that bad decisions make for great stories.
Yeah.
So it's like if you make a good decision, that's great for real life. But if you
Yeah.
make a bad decision, now that's good for a story. Like let's tell that.
Yeah. That's where the phrase "hold my beer"
Yeah.
comes from.
Exactly.
What do we talk about? When you go to work or you go to a social gathering, what do people typically talk about? What happened the other day that was sucked?
Yes.
Because that's it generates interaction. It
Yeah.
generates
Or
sympathy
was awe-inspiring.
or yeah.
Either way.
Yes.
But even things that are awe-inspiring are something happened and then something amazing overcame that, pushed through it. Either way.
Yeah.
But it's not everything went great yesterday.
Yeah.
If that is it, then you're like,
Okay, end the conversation.
yeah. So
Yeah. The Jane Austen. Gosh dang it! I forgot the name of the show and book now.
Pride and Prejudice, Persuasion, Emma.
Emma. So, if in Emma had just set up her friend and then they fell in love and that was the end of the story and she was like, I'm a great matchmaker. Like, well, that sucks. Jane Austen, you're a terrible writer.
It's like a waste of my time reading this.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's all of those things that Emma has to go through and her friend has to go through and the people around her have to experience that are this cycle of, well, something happens, I got to make a decision and then shift.
Mm-hmm.
And then something else happens and I have to make a decision and then shift.
Yeah. So question for you guys.
Yes.
What do you think that says about humanity? We don't want to read a happy ever after story. We want to read one with struggles. I mean, like, yes, we want a happy ending in the end. At least most of us do.
Yeah.
But like,
well, look at The Matrix with Keanu Reeves.
Mm-hmm.
Like, one of the things was they're like, well, why do we have to world where like this is all fake?
Yeah.
We all experience it as though it's real, but it's all fake. Why is there death and war and destruction and things that suck? And they're like, well, we first created a world that was all like everything was great and happy and lovely. and you guys couldn't handle it.
Yeah.
Like, you had to bring strife in no matter what.
Hmm.
And I'm like, conceptually, like, it's kind of playing off that concept. Um, but, you know, I think that the nature of humanity is that we all fall subject to our lesser demons
Yeah.
at some point, which is also why triumph over those demons we all at some level resonate with and want to connect with.
Yeah. The encouragement.
Yeah.
Mhm.
If there's no challenge, there's no growth. And if there's no growth or progression, there's nothing to hope for. I think that's what it all comes down
Yeah.
to.
That's what I think it comes down to is it's relatability. Like we can't relate to a world that's all perfect.
Yeah.
We need to see that struggles, but then that hope that if they can overcome it, then I can overcome my problems.
Yeah.
If they're battling the end of the world, like my, mean boss isn't
Yeah.
going to be the end of me, kind of thing. So yeah, I think it's definitely something to keep us going forward and that encouragement to.
Yeah. But also, I mean, so we're getting a little philosophical here, but
That's all right.
if we lived in a world where there was nothing to overcome ever, like what? Look at first world problems, where
Hmm.
what I said when I filled up this cup is I was like, I need some flavor in my water, and I've added some little flavoring thing into my water because I'm like, water's too bland. Like, what a pompous, ridiculous statement that is, that I can't drink boring water.
Yep.
Instead of just being like, I have water, I can just turn the sink on and there's water, and I'm so happy with that. I didn't even think about that.
Yep.
All I thought about was, I need ice in this because it's not cold enough, and I need flavoring because it's gross. I'm like, we I don't think as humans, I don't think we can thrive in a world without
Adversity.
something to overcome.
Yeah. It's the ambition. I mean,
Yeah.
that's where it all went wrong at the beginning.
Yeah.
So,
Look at the statistics on the number of people that they retire and then within a year of retirement they
Yeah.
die.
they lose purpose.
Yeah. And I'm making, like, you could make the argument of it had, well, people just stop taking care of themselves, whatever, or they get sick or they've had underlying condition, all these other things. But I'm
Yeah.
like, there are people that keep working, or they retire and then they like find things that these are all the things I've wanted to do and I'm working toward them. But how many people retire and then they just stop and then they wither away?
Yep.
You know,
It's just ingrained
like-
in us.
yeah. So I think that's what it comes down to from a story structure and plot is the plot of our lives is daily we have issues and decisions and we shift, and we have challenges and we make decisions and we shift. And the story structure is maybe you're a plumber or you're a lawyer or you're a student or whatever.
Hmm.
That's the structure of you're going to face different challenges, different things, depending on what the story is that your life is telling.
Yeah, exactly. You're not going to have, like, if you're a doctor, you're not going to be, worrying about a burning building like a firefighter. Like, you're not going to have that. I mean, okay, your building might burn down, but, like,
Or in-house.
yeah, say
maybe
that's not going to be your structure necessarily. You got to keep it aligned.
He's a doctor and he destroys their MRI machine and floods the hospital, and so it's not fire, but
Yeah.
he has to worry about floods
Yes.
that he
exactly.
caused.
Things could happen.
So
Yeah.
there can be other things that happen, but no, that's really I think that's where if you can learn that and put that into develop a skill of putting that into your writing habit and and put those in your toolbox of how does my life reflect on even on a small scale, what Superman has to overcome.
Yeah.
Then you can figure out plot, and then the structure is what are the events and the sequence of events that lay out whether it's Superman or you overcoming whatever the things are.
Yeah. And it also, story structure gives you that perfect formula. I mean, it's not perfect, but it helps you line it out.
Yeah.
You're not going to hit your biggest conflict at the beginning of the book and then they get less big as you go, kind of thing. Like somebody has figured out how to make the most impactful story there is with story structure. And so that's why you want to follow that, just because it's going to reach people. It's sound and it's research kind of thing.
Yeah.
You can mess it up if you want to, but like it's kind of hard to succeed at that. So that's really why story structure is there.
Yeah. Well, and some people will be really good at developing plots and following story structures. Some people will be less good at plots and story structures.
Yeah, I mean,
but as long as you can do a good job of like keeping it interesting, then follow that follow that as a guideline, but ultimately try to figure out how you can keep it interesting and keep it going, and then learn how to market really well.
Yeah, exactly. That's a whole nother topic.
Yes. Yeah. Okay. Well, any other thoughts? Anything you want to leave with listeners? Anybody who might be considering writing?
Yeah, no, the big thing is just to pick one structure and stick with it. Don't get overwhelmed with everything. And then just follow your plot points through. And make sure that they go with your external goal. That was one thing that I struggled with at the beginning, is my story structure was super sound. I was great at following that. And I had plot, but sometimes my plot didn't fit the story. Like we hit a conflict, but it wasn't a conflict that affected the main book goal. So you want to make sure you're always directing it towards that main book goal.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's it.
Okay. Well, again, if someone wants to find you and continue learning from you, how do they do that?
Yeah, so I am on the internet, lizverity.com. I have my posts that you can read weekly. You can sign up for my newsletter for weekly as well. And then I'm also on Facebook and Instagram, author Liz Verity, so you can follow that there. But if you want the writing advice, the newsletter is the best way to do it.
Okay. Well, thanks for coming today.
Yeah,
always
thanks
good
for
to have
having
you.
me. Yeah, it's been fun.
And thank you again for listening and following along with us. Till next time, go in good spirits. Thanks for listening to the Creators Guild podcast. Don't forget to get your copy of A Flight from Shadows, available on Amazon. While you're there, please rate it and give it a review. If you like the Creators Guild, please like and subscribe, and make sure to share it with your friends. Until next time, go in good spirits.